Okay, it is 4:33, and more people can come into the webinar if they'd like, but I'd like to go ahead and get started. So it is very good to have you guys on this webinar. It's too bad we can't do it as a Zoom meeting where I can see you, and we're looking forward to having you guys all on campus in August. And I know your teachers are looking forward to the same thing. I know this spring was so unusual and just totally different for us to be doing the remote learning thing, but we're really excited about the new school year. What I'd like to do is to talk to you a little bit about some of the plans that we have for the fall. I know some of these things have been shared. We had the video that came out a couple of weeks ago that shared some of the teaching and learning plans for the whole school. We had also the video in the letter about some of the health and safety protocols. As we have a group that's working on that. But I wanted to share some things that were a little more specific to upper school, some of the details of things like the scheduling, and give you some sense of that as we prepare for August, because there are some things we're going to do a little bit differently just because of all that's going on with coronavirus. We have to take additional precautions, and we need to be prepared for all of these things. So what I'd like to do today is just talk to you about a few things. I'll cover a chunk of it. Then I'll open it up for questions. If you have questions as we go, or once we stop, then you can feel free to enter them into the chat, and I'll answer as many as I can, in the time that we have. So the first thing I think is important for you guys to know is that the plan that we have for how we're going to handle the schedule, how we're going to handle some of the things with classes this school year, has been created by a group of teachers. So there's a teaching and learning task force that we have for the whole school, and we have one that's specific to middle and upper school. Miss Adams, Miss LeBron, Mr. Holman, and Dr. Schaefer were all big parts of that planning piece of it as well. So, I always like to make sure this is not Mr. Arjona's plan. This is the teachers and some people trying to really think carefully about what's best for you guys. We want to be back in school and want to have a plan that allows you guys to interact with your teachers, to interact with each other, and to be back in school, but to do so in a way that's safe, because we know that we have this pandemic going on around us, and we want to make sure that we can stay safe, that our teachers can stay safe, and that your families can as well. All right, so a couple of things. One thing to start with, this you may have already seen, which is that we have different scenarios. So this has been presented on before in the previous video, but in case you haven't seen that, there are different scenarios that we're looking at, all the way from high risk, the red scenario. That's where we were in the spring, where there was a lot of spread of this case, that it was too unsafe for us to really be in school. So we were doing all remote learning. So what we've now looked at is what's the plan for opening back up as the number of cases has gone down. So there's one where there's a little bit less risk, called orange. And in that case, we're limited to only having 10 people in an indoor space at a time. So if you may know, especially if you're involved in any sports, that right now, so we moved from red to orange really at the end of May. And that's what allowed us, and I think we made the announcement in early June. So that's what allowed, right now we have workouts for sports going on campus, but of course it's still in small groups. So as there are declines in cases, as the infection rate is low enough, then the next phase would be yellow and green. That would then allow us to have all students on campus. So there are still limits on gatherings, large gatherings of people. There are also limits on the number of students we might have in the hallway at one time. And still in the yellow and green, we still have to engage with some safety measures like the social distancing, because those things are going to be in place up until there is a breakthrough in treatment or vaccines or something that means that the risk has really diminished in terms of us being together. So when I talk about our plans, a first thing that I want to make clear is that we have a schedule that we're going to be moving to that is going to work across all of these scenarios. And again, that's some things we've already mentioned. That way, if there is some time that we have to switch, like, say something happens to where we have to go back into a hybrid or remote learning, that we can keep the same schedule, and we can be able to move back and forth easily. Because if we can move back and forth easily, that gives us the best chance of being on campus as much as we possibly can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what that schedule is, more of the details on it, and then also I'm going to be talking about what this will be like in green and yellow. I'm going to start from the assumption that we're going to be able to move into green and yellow that has all students on campus. Of course, after that, I'll talk a little bit about that hybrid scenario as well. But just know that when I'm talking about these plans, we're talking about when we can have all students on campus. So the first thing is the daily schedule. So when it comes to the daily schedule, one of the differences that we've talked about before is that you're only going to have 4 classes that meet each day. Those 4 classes are going to meet, and they're going to meet for a longer period of time. Instead of having 6 classes every day, you'll have 4 classes each day, and they'll meet every other day. So when you come in the morning, one of the key things is that in order to prevent scenarios where spread of things are likely, we have to prevent times where there's lots of students gathering in close quarters. So you guys remember from the hallways in the morning, that's one of those times. People are packed in the hallways hanging out. So we still want you to be able to come in, spend some time with your friends, but we're going to have to manage that a little bit more. So it won't just be anywhere. So if you get to school between 7 and 7:45 in the morning, 7:15 and 7:45 in the morning, then you can go to the library, and we'll have a certain capacity there. You can socialize, you can do some work in the morning if you get there. If you get to school at 7:45 or after, then you'll head straight to where your first period class is. Class this coming year will not start until 8:20. So we're actually going to start a little bit later than we normally have, 20 minutes later than we have the past couple of years. So maybe you'll be able to get a little extra sleep. But if you get there between 7:45 and 8:15, then what you'll just do is you'll head to your first period class. If you get there at 7:45, you head to your class, you can still hang out there. You can, get some work done, whatever you want to do. Class won't start till 8:20, and you will not be required to be at school until 8:20. So then you'll have each class will be a little bit longer, be an hour and 25 minutes. And then at 12:45, we'll have lunch. Lunch in the upper school this year is going to be all students are going to have the same hour-long block for lunch. We're going to stagger it a little bit. Advisory, instead of that being in the mid-morning, your advisory is going to be around the lunchtime. So for 9th and 10th grade, after your 3rd class, you'll go straight to advisory. You'll have advisory, and then you'll have lunch. For 11th and 12th grade, it'll be the opposite. You'll have lunch first, then you'll have advisory, and then you'll head to your last class. So what this schedule does is it limits the amount of transitions that we have during the day, and amount of different places that you're going, which is definitely going to be safer. So I want to talk briefly about how lunch is going to work. I'll, maybe delve into this a little bit more later. But the way that lunch will work this coming year is that in yellow and green, we'll still be able to use the dining hall. If we're all here in person, we'll still be able to use the dining hall. We certainly won't be able to have as many students in the dining hall as usual because of the distancing. But we're going to make greater use of eating outside when the weather is nice, and we're going to have some other spaces that you'll be able to go to, so that we'll, during that lunchtime. All right. So those are some of the key things about how our daily schedule is going to work. So now, when it comes to what that looks like, before we had an A through G schedule where there were 7 class periods. So what we're doing is, because there's 4 meeting on each day, we're going to move to an 8-period schedule. So go A through H instead of A through G. So what will happen is the classes will meet every other day. So on Monday, for instance, if it's an A day, A, B, C, and D will meet. Then the following next day, your other 4 classes will meet, and then it'll just keep alternating, right? So if you look at this initial schedule, you might be thinking, okay, well, you have 3 A days and only 2 E days. Well, it just keeps rotating every other day, so that what happens is over the course of 2 weeks, you get an even number of classes. So you can think of it as being like an A week where A period is first, and then an E week where E period is first. So what happens is that over the course of 2 weeks, you have all of your classes 5 times. So it ends up being about the same amount of class time as you had in the past, just in a little bit larger chunks every other day instead of 6 out of 7 days. So I think that brings up maybe a first question was, okay, this is an 8-period schedule now, A through H. How is that going to work? How are we going to convert to an 8-period schedule? We signed up for classes A through G. Well, the main thing that's going to mean is that 8th period is going to be a second study hall. One thing that you note is that if you have 4 classes each day, having that second study hall will mean that you will have a study hall in each day. The other thing is that we don't want this to mean that you then have additional academic, core classes. Taking your 6 classes out of 7 is still plenty. You're still going to have the same amount of work. You're still going to have the same expectations. So that 8th period for most will then be a second study hall. Part of the reason that we're doing moving to 8 periods as well, to make it not just an even 4 and 4 on each day, but is also to allow the classes to be a little bit smaller. We're going to spread out some of the classes. And if we also added, people adding additional core classes, then that would defeat the purpose of making the classes smaller. All right, then as I said, the goal is to have 1 study hall each day. And now we're going to work on that through the schedule. It may work out for some students. They have a heavier day and a lighter day, but we'll see there. There's a potential that if a student wants to add a 7th class as an elective, there may be some classes, may have a sort of standard list of classes that you could add if you wanted to add a 7th class, especially that's an elective, that still would make the overall workload reasonable. And so what's going to happen is our maximum class size, because of how we need to do this with the distancing, is going to be smaller. You're not going to have any classes over 18. And that's part of the reason why we have to spread out the numbers a little bit as well. All right, so maybe what will help is to illustrate this is showing you what a sample student schedule would look like. So let's say this is a 10th grader who takes Spanish, who's in band. This could be what their schedule looks like. Right? On Monday, they might have English, Geometry, and Spanish 2 at their study hall, and then on Tuesday, it might be band, chemistry, recent world history. So the classes don't meet every day, they meet every other day. And so that just gives you a sense of what it might look like. All right, so I think a few other things that I want to touch upon are community and social interactions. I think a common question when we think about how we're going to be adjusting things for this year might be, okay, well, when am I going to see my friends? Am I still going to get to interact with my classmates and my friends the way that, I usually do? And, the answer is you're definitely going to be able to still see your friends and definitely be able to interact in all the social things and the community that you want to. I'll talk a little bit about how. So one thing is that transitions between classes, that's another thing that we have to do in a particular way, because the sort of gathering of all the students in the hallway at one time is also, is something that would be higher risk for potential spread. So what we're doing is we're going to stagger class dismissal. So when the first bell rings, half of the class will be dismissed to their next class. Then, halfway through the passing period, about 2.5 minutes in, well, then the second half of the class will then go to their next class. We're not going to be using lockers this year. So one of the reasons is that it clogs up the hallways and causes it to jam up. But also there's less need for lockers because you're only going to have 3 or a maximum of 4 classes meeting on that day. So you just need to bring to school the things you need for those classes on that particular day. Now, in the hallways, of course, you'll still be able to talk to your friends and things like that, interact socially, but it just will be a little bit different in terms of how that's managed. Then lunch, as I mentioned, you will, might be using more spaces for lunch, might be making greater use of outside space for lunch, but that is still, and there'll be more distancing, but you still will be able to interact and with your friends at lunch. Advisory, and we'll still be having that. You noted that was in the schedule during that lunch block. We're still going to have peer leadership for 9th grade as well that we can work into that schedule when we have those advisory blocks. Then one thing that will be more difficult to carry out because of the distancing is assemblies. So as you know, when we are in the auditorium for an assembly, it's all the students in there. We're all packed indoors and we're all really close to each other. So that's the type of thing that is not a really good thing to do, for the spread of the virus. So we can fit a whole class in the auditorium, a whole grade level. So there might be more things that we do with grade level meetings. And for assemblies, we might do some of those more virtually, have each advisory get onto, a Zoom and have people who are hosting the webinar to, do that type of assembly. We also might be making use of outside. So we might be doing, in the stadium, we can spread out more. So if there's something we want to do as a whole, school, then we might make more use of the stadium to do a full school assembly. And, just like we had before, sometimes we might run a special schedule to allow for those particularly special assemblies that are longer than our typical advisory period. Another common question or thing to think about is, okay, what about the clubs that I'm in? When can clubs meet? So really, I think this schedule might be a little better for that, in fact, because it opens up 2 times, I think, for club meetings. One is the morning. So if we're starting a little bit later, starting at 8:20, then we have this block of time. People could get here at still what's a reasonable time of 7:45. And 7:45 to 8:15, because all the teachers will be here at that point, you could have a club that meets during that block of time. Or we also have that advisory lunch period, and that advisory lunch period can be used for club meetings as well. We might work out a schedule for when certain clubs meet to help so that they don't conflict with each other. But those 2 times definitely are going to be potential times for clubs to meet. All right. Now, other considerations or common questions, and then I'm going to open it up for a few minutes for some questions from you guys. So first, as was talked about in the town hall a couple of weeks ago, students and faculty, I have my cloth face covering right here, will be required to bring a cloth face covering or mask to school each day. As you know, if you've been reading anything about this, if you've been listening to what, Ms. Adams, her expertise in the epidemiology side, or seeing anything from the CDC, everything's come out that one of the best ways to prevent the spread of this is by wearing a mask. So you will need to bring one each day. Now, in terms of how often you have to wear it, under what circumstances, that's going to depend on what's going on at that time. So we'll have more information about that a little bit later. Certainly during lunch, you won't have to, of course, right, because you'll be eating. But a lot of times when you're going to be in close contact, or when you're going to be in close contact for an extended period of time, then we'll be wearing masks. And the thing I will also say is that this is in particular to help protect your teachers. Many of us are a bit older, and it's really important that we help do everything we can to protect all the adults and all the teachers in the school, in addition to protecting all of you and many of you who have family members who are at particular risk. There will be daily temperature checks. So what will happen is this will be either on the buses or when you come in on if you drive to school, when you park or in carpool, they'll be doing a temperature check. Now, that's not a perfect way to prevent someone from having coronavirus being on campus, because of course it's possible that people are asymptomatic, but it will be something that will help prevent people who are sick from coming to campus. If you have a temperature above 100, then you will have to go home. It'll mean that you're sick. That's true all the time. If you ever have a fever, if you ever have symptoms, you should stay home, but we're going to be doing those checks to make sure that we can protect everyone. Late starts, we had the late starts once a month. So we're not planning on doing those for this coming year. Part of the reason is because the overall start time, is later every day. So now instead of starting at 8, we're starting at 8:20. We're essentially doing a bit of a late start every day. Seniors, I know this is also a common question of, will we still have senior privileges? Yes. We may have to look at exactly what that looks like, especially if there's not a rotation, how that works. But you still will be able to have a free period. You still will have senior privileges, and and all the things that go along with that. I know a common question is athletics. I put that on here just because we do already have some of the athletics through conditioning that's starting. That's not exclusively a Walker decision, right? That's the GHSA has a big say in what happens with athletics, and other schools as well. So there's not a whole lot for me to say at this point, just knowing that there's a lot of different factors when it comes to athletics. Another common question, will the schedule rotate? So that is a good question. I know at least, and I know many of the students like the fact that our schedule rotates. Part of the thing that we want to prevent right now is this is already going to be a different schedule, and there's going to be a lot of changes. So we want to prevent making things too confusing by adding a rotation as well. So right now, we don't know that there will be a rotation. We're still looking at it, though. We're still looking at ways we could do it and weighing the benefits of a rotation versus, will this make it too confusing for everyone to keep up with what's going on? So we're still debating that and looking at ways to have the rotation. So that's still an open question, but there's not a guarantee that it will rotate. And then what about school events? So what about things like homecoming or other events that we have at school? And the main answer I have for you right now is we're going to do everything we can to maintain all the social events that you guys have. We definitely will still be doing them. It just may look a little bit different. We might need to if we do an assembly, if we do a pep rally, it might need to be in the stadium, right? So we can be outside and be together. We might need to do some events more, virtually or in smaller groups. But know that that social component of school is a really important part of it in addition to the classes. All right, so a couple of things that I want to go ahead and do. Let me stop here. There's still a few more things that I want to touch upon, but I'll stop for a second and take some questions. So, all right, so one question I saw, does the second study hall act as a second free period for seniors? So, we haven't worked out the full schedule yet, but it's looking like yes, as long as, and I will say this, and if it was a rising senior who asked that question, one of the key things is that if the downside, the potential risk with a free period is if students are gathering and they're not maintaining the social distancing, then that could cause potential issues. But I think as long as we work out places where the seniors could go, as long as you guys will do things when it comes to the social distancing, I don't see why the second study hall couldn't just be a second free period. That also brings up a question about the study halls. So for 10th and 11th grade, we have typically done the study halls in Bowden Library, but the problem is we can't have large groups in that space like we had before. So the study halls for 10th and 11th graders for this coming year will be in a classroom, with other 10th and 11th graders, but it'll be in smaller groups than in the large group in Bowden. All right, see another few questions. So with cases currently rising in Georgia due to reopening, wouldn't we be in the orange zone right now? Okay, so that is a good question. Right now, that is the zone that we're in, the scenario we're in, orange, right? And I'll talk a little bit about that. What would happen if, when school starts in August, if we were in orange, what would that mean? So I'll talk about that. If you don't rotate, then some seniors will get to come on late or leave early, and others will not, correct? So that is part of the rotation, right? Is the rotation means that your privilege always changed as you go. So what we're thinking about, and what we may do is we might convene a group of seniors to get some ideas, is if it doesn't rotate, it may just mean that your privileges all, you get a different privilege depending on when your free period is, right? So if it's at lunch, leaving for lunch, if it's in the morning, coming late, if it's, leaving early, we might then have to just ensure that each class period has its own particular senior privilege that goes with it. I will say, by the way, that a thank you to, there was a group of students, rising juniors and seniors, that we talked with a couple of weeks ago, sort of as a little bit of a focus group around some of these things, and provided really good input. And I think around some of those questions, especially things that are relevant to seniors, we'll plan in July to have some particular meetings to talk through some of those things. All right. All right, so another couple of questions there. So will we be able to fill that 8th period if we choose? So the answer to that is probably, but probably with a specified set of classes. Filling it with another core academic class, we probably will not be able to do, because that defeats the purpose of keeping the classes smaller. And we don't want to add that additional academic burden. You're still going to have the same number of amount of overall classes. And so that I don't think will be advisable. What you might be able to do is add in an elective class into that block. And so probably what we'll do is, based on when we see the numbers from the schedule, we might say, here is a list of classes that you could potentially add as a class in that 8th class period. All right, so let's see another couple of questions here. All right, I'm going to expand this a little bit so I can see it. All right, so out of curiosity, so what will happen when someone does not have a mask when necessary? So the attitude towards this is something that's to help everyone's safety. It's not something where it's like a, where we really want to make it a punitive discipline thing. It's more about helping. So as an example, I think probably the main thing that happens is we have masks. We have a limited supply. And so we'll probably have masks that if someone forgets or they don't have it, they're not wearing it, that we can give them a mask to wear in that moment. All right, what determines the difference between the yellow and orange? And what's one major difference that makes it all students are half? So the difference between us being in green or yellow and us being in orange is based on how much spread and the level of risk we have in the surrounding area. As there is a decrease in cases, then that allows us to move to, and there's a overall infection rate. That means that the overall infection is lessening in our surrounding area. And the data we look at is for Cobb County in particular. Then, and some surrounding counties, but we focus particularly on Cobb County, then that's what allows us to be in the green or yellow. All right, another good question. Will the senior break during advisory still happen? So I think that's another thing where we might just have to get creative. I certainly would want to keep that up. Now, the thing is, advisory is now during lunch. So, and it's not during that mid-morning anymore. So I think there's possibilities. Maybe we look at doing senior breaks in the morning as a before school, if we want to do more of a breakfast type thing. Maybe we do it at lunch, and maybe there are some senior parents that bring in a special treat for lunch or something like that to do during that advisory time. So the senior breaks, I think we can still do. It might just mean getting more creative about exactly how we do it, because it's at a different time during the day. Is lunch going to be with a set group of people, or like normal, just in different areas? So during green and yellow, what I've been talking about, then it is just going to be in different areas. So you can still eat with whoever you want. You might be more likely to have lunch with your friends, because instead of having the first and second lunch, the whole grade level will have lunch at the same time. So it's just going to be in different areas, making more use of outside, and it might need to be in smaller groups, but you still will be able to eat lunch with your friends. One will be able to select that 8th period class or elect it. So what we're going to do is we're going to build the schedule first. We're in the midst of that. I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail in a minute. Once the schedule is out, then if students want to add an additional class, and we know exactly what we'll be able, you'll have the potential to be able to add, then you can do that as part of the schedule changes. All right, how do you plan to advocate for students with increased risk of complications in the school setting? Okay, and what I want to do is I'm going to wait on that question just for a minute, because when we talk about hybrid and we talk about the technology solutions we're looking at, then that's going to have a relevant thing. So if I don't answer that question, come back to it again. But I think what I'm going to talk about next will answer that. Since we're not using lockers, will there be greater access to online textbooks? Yes, that also has to do with the technology thing that I'm talking about. So it's two sides of it. One, you only have to bring the books for 3 classes, or maybe 4 if you don't have a study hall on that day, even though most will. But there probably will be a greater reliance on online textbooks. The other thing is that if there's something that you're going to need to leave somewhere, or if there is a book that's particularly heavy, then what you might need to do is maybe just work with the teacher more and say, hey, this is a book I need for this class. Can I leave this here? There might be a space in the room they might be able to accommodate you to. We don't want, the intent with the lockers is not to make everybody carry a bunch of stuff. We're going to that partially because we know we'll have less classes per day. Where do we see the schedule for the upcoming year, and is it published to see yet? So it's not published yet. We're still working on it. All of these things are meaning that all these adjustments we're having to make for the school year are meaning that the schedule is more complicated. So we haven't published it yet, and when it is published, we'll send an email out, and you'll be able to log into Walker Web and see it. Okay, so other good questions here I see in the Q&A. You guys are doing a great job here. How have the recent increase in cases affected plans? That's a good question. So it hasn't affected anything right now because we moved to orange. We are still in orange based off of everything that's happened. I think the only danger in this recent increase in cases, it makes it so that we need to see a decline in cases to move to yellow and green. So we still have, there's still more than a month, month and a half till school starts. So there's still plenty of time, but we want to see cases moving in the other direction so that it's lower risk for all of us. And I think I answered a little bit of where there'll still be a place for us to keep things at school. Certainly, like if there's bags that you need for sports, there can be places, and that might be one of the things I'm going to jot that down. If you need to, keep a bag, and there may be things you can place it on top of lockers or place it in a particular teacher's classroom. What about the 0 period? So the 0 period is only being used for, I believe, workouts for some of the particular sports. All right, if people are uncomfortable going back to school, is there an option to virtual learning? The short answer is yes, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute. At the moment, does this schedule only apply for the fall semester, or does it apply to the spring semester? That's a very good question. So the schedule that we're setting up is going to apply for the school year. We're going to set up, you'll have the same, classes and the 4 per day for the entire school year. If we're back, if we're in person and things are great and we're able to not have to have all the mitigation strategies, then that's excellent. We can just still conduct school with the schedule as we would have, normal, just now doing it with less classes per day. If athletics happen in the fall, how would the locker room situation work? That's a great question. I'm sure there's going to have to be some strategies around that. And I know Mr. Block is leading a group that's looking at the athletic side. Will lunches be prepackaged? And if so, will we still be able to get seconds? That's a great question. So the short answer is the main thing that's going to be not true in the lunches is we can't have things like the open bars, like the salad bar, the sandwich bar, where there a lot of people are, have the potential to touch and share those things. So it may be prepackaged stuff. It may be things that are just pre-prepared where they're plating it for you, but you still will be able to go back and get more food. And that, I think, answers the next question. Will you need to bring your own lunches? So, of course, as before, you can, but you will still have lunch provided by Sage. There will still be different choices. There will still be, a lot of different things, but they'll be providing lunch for you. And will we have to wear masks all the time, like during classes, or only wear them in populated areas? So that's a good question. It's going to depend. It's going to depend on what's going on with the infection rates at that time and what's going on with which scenario we're in. But definitely, when we're talking about places where we can't social distance, that will be, when we'll definitely need to have them. I can't say yet when it comes to classes or some of the other circumstances, but there will be times that you'll be able to have a little bit of a break from that, like lunch and things like that, definitely in all scenarios. But in terms of how often and when you can take them off, we don't know all the details of that yet. How will the student body be split when only half of them are on campus? I'll talk about that in just a minute. All right, well, any field trips that might happen in certain class grades can be postponed for now. So again, that depends on what phase we're in. So if we're in that green phase, there will be some definitely field trips that happen. If we're in orange or yellow, then we'll be waiting on trips. But it may depend on where the field trip is to. If it's somewhere where it's not going to be high risk for people, then those are going to be more likely to keep going ahead. Will guests still be allowed on campus? So especially early on, we're going to be severely limiting the number of visitors on campus. As usual, like when it comes to during the school day, we already don't allow students that aren't Walker students to come onto campus as guests. Usually the type of guests would have been guest speakers or maybe parents if they were coming on campus. But especially in the phases that are tighter, we won't have guests. And then there'll also be a protocol for temperature checks and things like that. Spectators be allowed at sporting events. That's a good question. That falls under that athletics part. And, I don't know that we have answers to that part yet. And those may be, like I said, Coach Block and the rest on the athletic side, they're looking at it. The mask wearing is on a day-to-day basis planned for letting student body know we have to wear them. Okay, so, and I do want to go ahead and specify something, which is that it's not, when I say it depends on scenario, the scenario is not going to change on a day-to-day basis. So it's not like this day we're in yellow, this day we're in green, this day. That's not the way it will be, is that we'll have a plan set out, and then if things change, we then can move, but there'll be a lot of, because it has other implications, there'll be a lot of prep for that. So we'll have a plan laid out heading into the school year of these details that depend on the scenario will all be laid out. So I don't want to give the impression that it is on a day-to-day basis. All right. Okay, so now let's go ahead. And I'm going to move forward a little bit on some other things, especially talking about the hybrid. All right, so this idea of the orange scenario, what happens in the orange scenario, the hybrid scenario? So first off is that we'd have half the students on campus each day. So the orange scenario is if there's a level of risk that's high enough to where we would need to restrict the total number of students on campus and as well the number of students in a particular indoor classroom at a time. So we'd have half the students on campus each day, and we would need to have less than 10 students in the classroom at a time. So what would happen is you would be on campus, you'd be on campus for 2 days, followed by 2 days of remote learning. So that would mean, well, half the students are on campus, the other half are remote learning, and then it would flip-flop. So it would just do 2 days, 2 days, 2 days. The remote learning, when we say remote learning, it's a little bit different than what we were talking about in the spring. So what would happen is you would be able to join the class through live streaming. So when you're in that remote learning, you would have the same schedule. The class would be taking place on campus, but you would be able to live stream and keep up with that class as it goes on, right? It's just half the students would be in person and half the students would be live streaming the class, and then the next 2 days it would flip-flop. So this question of, well, how would we determine how students are split in half? That's a good question. We're looking at that right now. We would really probably have to do it in a fairly random way so that we get even halves and that they're evenly distributed across the classes. Just in the orange scenario, that's the one where we wouldn't be using the dining hall. There, we would have lunches in smaller groups in classrooms and or outside. So you might be eating with your advisory, or we might have a couple of advisories that might be eating outside together, or we might switch it up. We might say, okay, on this day you eat with your advisory, on this day you eat with this group, just to ensure that if it's going to be in smaller groups, that we allow people to eat with different people. And this is, I want to emphasize, this is just in the orange scenario. This is just in sort of the tightest one that we have. So this gives a little bit of a sense of how that schedule might work, that hybrid. So we would have, say, the maroon group and the gold group, and then what happens is on, the first 2 days of the week, the maroon group is on campus while the gold group is doing remote learning, and then it flip-flops, right? And then the next week it would be the reverse of that. So the other thing is you say, well, if I'm in maroon group and someone else I know is in gold, well, I see them. So what we would also do is work in some things that we would call flex days if we were in the hybrid. And the flex day would be a day where maybe, where we get students together across these groups. Maybe it's all of a certain grade level be on campus. Or maybe we just mix the groups to shuffle it up. So now I want to, so again, that's stuff on the hybrid. The hybrid is only in the orange scenario. We're planning for the green and yellow, and also remaining optimistic about that. But I do want to show that we do have this backup plan of the hybrid scenario if we need to go to that, and give you a little bit about what that would be like. So the main thing is, when I've talked about this a little bit before, some people start thinking, okay, well, we're going to be in this hybrid, it's all going to be split. Don't assume that. We're starting from the assumption of the yellow and green, and if we need to go to the orange, we have the orange there. All right, so then the student technology, a couple of things to note on this, and a couple of these things are new. We're going to be putting out information about this, but I wanted to give you guys a heads up. So the first thing is, what we're going to ask is that all students this year bring a device with them to school. So this could be, I know a number of students did before, but we would like for all students to do this. This can be either a tablet with a keyboard, a Chromebook, or a laptop. We're going to be putting out information on what are the basic requirements. So it doesn't have to be a laptop. It just needs to be something that you could type on, something you would access Walker Web, something that has a webcam and a microphone for a Zoom session if needed, so we'll have those basic requirements. The basic is it can't be just a phone. Now, for people, you might say, well, I don't have a laptop or a Chromebook or a tablet. I don't have that, and I don't know that I can get one, or that is certainly an expense. So if you don't have access to one, we're going to have Chromebooks available to loan out. And so it's not something where we want to put a financial hardship on families, especially during this time. So we will have options if there's one you don't have, access to one. But by the reason that we're doing this is having a device on campus allows us to not have to do the shared devices. So the labs, the Chromebook carts. You guys have to share those things, and so again, for safety reasons, want to limit how much is shared. And so bringing devices. The other thing is it's going to limit the amount that we have papers going back and forth, because what teachers are going to do, that way they can have more things submitted through Walker Web if everyone has their device with them. Okay, so this, and I think this goes back to a question previously. So what happens if you're sick? What happens if you get quarantined? So, if you come into contact, you might not be sick yourself, but you came into contact with someone who has COVID-19 and you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. Or what happens just if you are higher risk, or someone in your family is particularly high risk and you're not comfortable coming to school. So I think that's where what we talked about earlier, even when we're not in hybrid, even when we're in the yellow and green, we're still going to be live streaming classes. So students can, if they fall into one of these categories, can still then participate virtually, and not just be doing work on their own, but actually be, seeing what's going on in the classes and live streaming those. So that we'll have more details to come on how that's an option and how exactly that'll work, or how you opt into that. But because the type of thing that will happen this year is, let's say you get sick, just a normal sickness, you get strep throat or something like that, well, you're going to run a fever, and your parents and your doctors might take more precautions and hold you out of school a little bit longer. So we don't want that to have a big negative academic impact. So having something like this in place, you'll be better able to keep up with what's going on in school if you happen to be out. All right, so a couple of things moving forward, and then I'll take any additional questions. You guys have been great. One, we're moving forward building the schedule now. So I know that usually we come out with a schedule around this time, but this is more complicated because what we're having to prepare for. So we're still in the midst of building the schedule. We're going to publish it in early to mid-July. So what will happen is we'll send out an email to all the students saying that your schedule is up in Walker Web, and then you'll be able to log in and see your classes. And then at that time, we'll communicate how schedule changes will work. It'll be the same idea that you'll go through your grade level dean, but we'll have a particular process for it. The other thing is that you should go ahead though, and when it comes to summer reading and summer assignments, if you signed up for the class and it has a summer assignment, go ahead and you should be working on that. And summer reading, of course, you all have summer reading across all of your English classes, so make sure that you're doing your summer reading. You can access that on Walker Web under Upper School Resources right now. And this is also a spot if you say, well, what happens if I signed up for a class and, or there's a class that I add late because of the scheduling and has a summer assignment, right? If it happens late in the summer, I'm sure the teacher will work with you. They've done that in past years, but you need to be going ahead and working on your summer assignments. Okay, so I know I took some questions earlier, but now we've covered a little bit more on the technology and on the hybrid. So I want to see if there are any other questions. So will synchronous class sessions be recorded? So the live streaming, yeah, the idea is that those live streamed classes will be recorded. Now, if you are out, and let's say that you're out, but you're just quarantined, or it's maybe because you're not comfortable being in school, so maybe you're participating virtually, or in the hybrid, you still will need to attend the classes live, right? If you're sick, that's a different matter. But if it's the hybrid or something, then you'll need to still attend them live, just like you did in the spring. All right, how will live stream classes affect absences? All right, so that's a good question. So if it's something, again, this is supposing you're not sick, supposing you're out because you're quarantined, or it's a hybrid, then there'll still be attendance taken because you'll be expected to join those classes live and join those synchronously. You heard this year there's a change in uniforms. Is that true? No, there's no particular planned change in the upper school dress code. How will you decide who's in the maroon and gold group? To be honest, we have not determined that yet. We're trying to figure out what the best way is to do that with the schedule. So it'll for the most part, be random. And again, that's only if needed, only if we're going to be in orange, right? If we're in yellow and green, there's no different maroon and gold group. Everyone's on campus every day. So that's the hope, and that's what we're looking towards. But if we need the maroon and gold group, we haven't yet determined that. We're in the midst of the scheduling process to try to figure that out. Okay, a good question. What's the protocol if a student or faculty gets COVID-19? Okay, so this really comes from the health and safety team task force that's looking at this. There's going to be a whole document that they come out with that talks about this process, but the basics are, if we find out that a student is or a faculty member is suspected of or has COVID-19, then that student, they will of course need to be out for an extended period of time. People who have had, it'll depend on how many people they had sustained contact with. So sustained contact means within 6 feet and more than 15 minutes. So if you just pass by someone and someone discovered that they had COVID-19, you just pass by them in the hallway, or you just, that's not going to, you're not going to be considered to be high risk to where you would need to quarantine. But if you had sustained contact with them, it was closer than 6 feet, then those people will have to, figure out who those people would be. We'll contact them and then ensure that we'll have to quarantine for a period of time. And that might be the case where maybe they'll be needing to join virtually for some period of time. It also then may result, depending on where that student was and what facilities they were using before they were out, and at the time where they were thought to be infectious, then we may have to shut down for cleaning for a day or two, as well, depending on what spaces they were in. So an example is, let's say that happens in the primary school, right? If that happens in the primary school, there's not an interaction that the primary school has with the upper school. So they might have to shut that down for cleaning for a day or two. There may be people there that might have to quarantine, but that won't affect anything on the upper school side. But that's a little bit of the, that process. There'll be a much more laid out process, but those are the basics. Another one, how will asking questions work during the hybrid, like if you're asking from home? Okay, so that's a very good question. So you're going to be live streamed. In most cases, then it'll also be a Zoom. So there will be some protocol like, something along these lines. So if they're live streaming the class, teachers may set aside a time to ask questions. What they may do is they talk, maybe while one group of students is working on particular problems, maybe they'll come then to the group that's at home, live streaming to get questions there, or there may be a separate time set aside. That's something that definitely, as teachers, we're talking about how to best do that, because that's a very important part of it, is you need to be able to ask questions. And, of course, you'll be able to ask them on your in-person days, but we don't want you to have to wait, if you have a question in class, to still be able to interact. And then another good question, will the access to restrooms be restricted? No, students will certainly be able to use the restroom when they need to use the restroom. What we might do is, in fact, and we were talking about this as a faculty today, in fact, in a block schedule, which is a longer block of time, the way that the best thing to do if you have an hour and 25-minute class is to break it up a little bit, maybe have a little break in the middle. And a lot of the teachers were talking about what they can do is have a staggered time, or maybe there's a break after 45 minutes. You tell the students, okay, if you need to go to the restroom, or you need to fill up your water bottle, if you need to go wash your hands, then go do that now. So no, students will be able to use the restroom. What we just ask is take precautions like, social distance in the restroom. Don't take those basic precautions. Will there be clubs in an orange hybrid zone? How would all the members be able to attend? That's a good question. It might be then, that's what we might do on some of those flex days, is leave time for clubs. You might end up if in the same way the classes would be doing, some people in person, some live stream, it might be that where you have some people joining a club meeting on a Zoom and other people in person. So I think there will be things like, like that we might have to look at if we end up having to do the hybrid. What classes look like that are more hands-on, chemistry, ceramics, et cetera? Okay, that's also a good question. You guys are coming up with great ones. For that, well, the main thing we're looking at is ensuring that we don't have a lot of shared materials, or if materials are shared, that they are cleaned in between. So an example maybe that's a easy one to use would be robotics, right? So you have a group that's working on a robot. As long as what you do is if people are working on it with their hands, only one person doing that at a time, and then doing a cleaning process before the next person does it. So same things, if in ceramics or in art, you're using, tools or things like that, if you just use your own for that class, and then before the next class, the teacher will be cleaning. All right, so you guys came up with some very good questions. It's 5:29, we're right about at the end of the hour. I'll see another one popping up. Oh yeah, so this is a good question too. So if you're 9th or 10th grade and you're not having lunch until almost 1 o'clock, for instance, will there be a scheduled time for students to eat a snack? If so, will it have to be in a quarantine way, or the students are sent to another room, or that does not happen? Okay, so yeah, definitely there will be a way to do that. So what we likely will do is ensure that in that maybe that second period class, that teachers have some leeway for students to have a snack. Maybe it's at the end of that class, or maybe it's in the middle. Maybe if they do a little break, or maybe they just say, hey, if you have a snack, you can feel free to bring it into this class. So we're going to integrate something like that into the day. I think that is a good question, and something we've already thought about. Haven't come up with exactly a rule across the board, but the teachers are generally on board with that as well. All right, so I want to compliment you guys. You guys came up with excellent questions. I may do something like this a little bit later, in July, maybe do something even a little bit based off of the individual grade levels, because as we develop things, as we have the schedule comes out, and just to make sure that you guys have all the details for starting school. All right, if there are any other questions, feel free to email me anytime. And if you have ideas of way that our plan can be improved or something we should do, hey, please feel free, send me an idea. And I also want to say that it doesn't mean that all of these things that we've laid out are we may adjust things. If the guidance from CDC, or if the guidance from public health authorities, or if the conditions change, then we'll make adjustments to respond to that, because our goal is to have school, to have you be able to have your classes, interact with your teachers, interact with each other, and do so in the safest way possible. So if you have ideas of that, if there are ways in which the recommendations from the health authorities change, then we can certainly make some changes before the start of school. I'll answer the other question that came in. Will all the classes use up the entire hour and 25 minutes? So that will be the class time. The key things for the way that the best practices for teachers on how to use a block like that is to break it up. So, it's not going to be, I teach economics. I know that using an hour and 25 minutes, that would be, borderline torture, just to lecture you on economics for an hour and 25 minutes. So a lot of and we're doing professional development with the teachers. A number of your teachers have taught before in a block schedule. There's a lot of good things to make sure that it's engaging, and make sure you switch it up for students over the course of the class. So, it might be you do something for 25 or 30 minutes, then you do some practice, and then you do something different. So the teachers are definitely going to use it in some different ways, and we're talking about what's the best way to use it, knowing that we don't want to, doing the same thing for an hour and 25 minutes is not good for anyone. All right, so again, thank you guys, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions, or if there's any other way that that we can help. All right, and I'll see you guys later.